With inflation above 8%, where do you turn? If you've read the headlines recently, likely you've heard of I bonds. Series I savings bonds are a type of government bond that currently, if you buy them, you will earn 4.81% over the next 6 months. Now, you may see a higher quoted rate, and that is the annual interest rate, but let's break down how these bonds work and go into them into a little more detail so you can be informed whether they make sense in your situation. I bonds are a type of government bond. They were introduced in 1998, and there's two components of how you earn interest. One is the fixed rate, which stays the same for the life of the bond, and then two is the semi-annual inflation rate, and that changes every 6 months. And that is why I quoted a lower rate at the beginning of this video, because the rate you may see quoted out there is 2 times that 4.81%. But I don't like quoting it that way because the interest rate does change every 6 months. Currently, if you buy an I bond, your fixed rate is going to be 0%. And as I mentioned, that stays for the life of the bond. So the fixed rate component is going to be 0% now, and it's going to be there 30 years from now, assuming that you hold the bond that long. The semi-annual inflation rate is currently 4.81%, and so anytime that you buy a bond before the end of October of 2022, you're going to earn 4.81% over the next 6 months. Doesn't matter in what time period you buy that bond, it'll be that for the next 6 months. And I bonds do reset every 6 months, so once you earn that over that 6 months, you're gonna have a new rate, which is going to be released later this year. Now, there is a neat little trick that if you buy during a certain window of time each year, you may know the interest rate over the next 12 months and not just the next 6 months. So as an example, back in April, inflation numbers came out mid-April or so, and you had until the end of April to buy an I bond and earn 6 months of interest at the old rate, and then you'd earn 6 months of interest after that at the new rate that people were estimating based on the inflation numbers. It wasn't announced exactly then, but you can get an idea of it during that time period. So as an example, this coming October, what you may be able to do is buy in mid to late October and know that you're going to earn 4.81% over the next 6 months, and you may get a glimpse into the future of what the inflation data was. That will be the 6 months after that period. And so this is a way to have a little more certainty in there. I'm not necessarily advocating it because you may want to start just earning that interest today, and you'll just be willing to accept what the interest will be after that first 6 months period. But if you're falling in that window where you may know the inflation rate already, it may be worthwhile to wait, or you may want to buy it then. There are some limitations with I bonds to be aware of. As I mentioned, it is a 30-year bond, but you don't need to hold it for the full 30 years. The only requirement is that you have to hold it at least 1 year. There's really not any liquidity or way to get money out of it within the first year, so really this shouldn't be used as an emergency fund, because an emergency fund, you want access to the money, but this could be something for years 2 through 5. And the reason I say that is because anytime that you cash out an I bond within 5 years, you're gonna give up the last 3 months of interest. So if you were to hold the I bond for 24 months, you'd give up the interest from the last 3 months of that. So for people who are using this as sort of a short-term savings tool right now, it's not a bad idea as long as you can get past that 1 year, because even if you work past that 1 year and then give up the last 3 months of interest, it's still fairly high compared to the rest of the bond market right now. And so ideally, you're not using this for any really short-term money, but I would call this maybe short to middle term. Anything between a year and 5 years, it's a reasonable way to use cash that may be sitting in a bank account not earning very much right now. In terms of taxation, I bonds are taxed at a federal level, but not on a state level. So you do have a slight tax benefit there. And there are really 2 routes to go with I bonds in terms of taxation. You can wait until the bond matures or you give up ownership, or you can report the interest along the way. But something to note here is if you do decide to report the interest along the way, you do have to do that for future savings bonds. So just something to be aware of, you kind of have to treat it one way or the other. I bonds also have a neat feature in that if you use them for educational expenses, sometimes they can be used tax-free. Just make sure you're aware of the rules around that and when you need to cash it out and when you need to spend it, because there are some strict guidelines there. Now, one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of I bonds, well, there are a couple of reasons, but one of them is they can't be purchased in a brokerage account. You have to go through the Treasury Direct website, and if you've ever been on there, you know it's a clunky website. It is so clunky. I had been reading this and then I went on just to experience it myself, and to type in a password, you don't actually type in the password. There's a keyboard where you go and you click your mouse on each character to put in your password, and you have to do this every time you log in. Now, granted, you're probably not going to be logging in to the website that often, but it's still a pain if you ever want to log in that you have to click every single character of your password. One of the other reasons that I bonds aren't huge on my list here is because there is a limitation. It's $10,000 per person or a social security number. So if you have different entities such as an LLC or an irrevocable trust, you could theoretically buy I bonds for that, but you are going to have to create a separate Treasury Direct account for each type of account or person or social security number, however you want to call it. And so it's one of those things where a $10,000 limit per person or per social security number, for most people with significant net worth, that's not really gonna move the needle. For someone with $2 million, a $10,000 investment is gonna be 0.5%. It's just not gonna change the financial plan. If we wanna optimize as much as possible, yes, an I bond makes sense, but again, it's just not gonna make a world of difference for most folks unless your net worth is really low. To sum it up, when do I bonds make sense to purchase? I'd say if you have extra cash that you're not currently using, but you may use in the next 2 to 5 years, I bonds are a reasonable place to park it right now. You know you're gonna get 4.81%. It's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government over the next 6 months, but you do have that uncertainty at the end of that 6-month period where you don't know what it's gonna yield, and you still are gonna be stuck in the bond at least for a year. And the only way the interest rate is going to stay high over the next 6 months is if inflation continues to be high, because again, you're getting 0% on that fixed rate component. All of the return is coming in the form of inflation. And I don't know what inflation is gonna be, nobody does, but just something to be aware of. Something that I would mention as well is that if you have a lot of cash on the sidelines right now, I would sort of question what that is being used for. We want all of our money to have a purpose, and the way that I'm reading a lot of articles right now, a lot of people are buying I bonds just because they have more cash than they know what to do with, which I think is a good time to come back to an investment policy statement and try to figure out, how are these funds meant to be used? What should my investments look like? For a lot of people, I'm feeling like this I bond is sort of a band-aid solution that's not really changing anything. It's not moving their financial needle, but they're doing it anyway. And there's nothing wrong with that to earn a slightly higher rate of interest, but just want to question the overall logic that's going on right now, just because I feel like these are getting a lot of attention for something that for a lot of higher net worth folks isn't really going to change much. Hope you've enjoyed this video on I bonds, and hopefully you know now whether it makes sense in your situation. If you like this sort of content and want regular updates, I suggest clicking the description down below, and there's a link to my newsletter. Thanks for watching.